Well, Darwin Day is celebrated around the world as a celebration of science and especially evolution in honour of the great man who wrote Origin of Species and changed the way that human beings think of themselves. We're just a type of chimpanzee with a big brain. And we shouldn't forget Alfred Russel Wallace, who came up with the theory of evolution by natural selection at the same time as Darwin, and a special local link to Wallace, who is buried in Broadstone, not far from here. So helping us to celebrate Darwin Day today is our special guest speaker, Robin Ince. Robin was that some whoops? I heard some whoops there, yes, well done. Robin is a comedian, actor and writer. He's best known for his appearances at Dorset Humanists. This is his second visit to Dorset Humanists, and I actually looked on our records earlier today and found out that his last visit to our Darwin Day was in 2012. So he's not coming regularly enough to our meetings, so we're going to try and put that right. He's also famous for presenting the BBC radio show The Infinite Monkey Cage with a little-known physicist called Brian Cox. I'm not really supposed to be doing the jokes, but I couldn't resist just a few. So as it's his second visit, we hope it will not be his last. I also looked up a few more details about him today. Apparently he's got an honorary doctorate in science from Royal Holloway. Is that right, Robin? Yeah. Yes, yeah, okay. And most importantly, he is a patron of Humanists UK. So that's enough from me. More from me a little bit later. But meanwhile, will you please give a big welcome to Robin Ince?
I think most importantly, we should remember that not only did I win Pointless Celebrities, but I beat Jim Al-Khalili. So there we are. That's yes, it makes me, therefore means I know more about physics than him. No, it doesn't. So I'm going to, I don't know if I need to use this or not the microphone, so I'm quite loud. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm going to just deliver like this. I hope, is there a hearing loop as well? Okay, if there's a hearing loop, then I will. I'll try and talk quieter, because I normally project in a room like this. So I'll start off, what I'm going to talk about today is, last time I was here, I did talk quite a bit about Charles Darwin, and today I'm probably not. Charles Darwin is a scientist and a human being who's always fascinated, and Alfred Russel Wallace as well. I mean, the books that he wrote about so many. In fact, interestingly, Flat Earth, which are currently, I think many of us are trying to understand how people believe that the Earth is flat. Alfred Russel Wallace actually was almost destroyed by the fact that he was given, there was a man who said the Earth's definitely flat. If you can prove it's not flat, I will give you £500. And Alfred Russel Wallace very simply proved that it wasn't flat, and the man then attempted to actually destroy his life. So it's interesting to see that, 130 years later, the same debates, for some reason, the same kind of strange ideas continue to return, and those people who offer up evidence are very often kind of poo-pooed, and now, of course, we see ignored by social media and news media. So things don't really change. But Alfred Russel Wallace, an incredible mind and a fascinating individual. Charles Darwin, of course, a shy man, a man who was frequently ill as well, who was tremendously worried about the ramifications of his idea of natural selection. A man also who wrote still the most important book about barnacles ever written. He became utterly obsessed with barnacles. In fact, Steve Jones, the wonderful writer and scientist Steve Jones, whose books include Almost Like a Whale, which is a rewriting of On the Origin of Species with what we currently know in science. I asked Steve, who's an expert on Darwin, I said, are there any books of Charles Darwin's that I shouldn't read? He said, don't read his books about barnacles. He became overly obsessed. And in fact, so much so that he used to have in his, every single day pretty much, barnacle samples from around the world would arrive at his house. And his children were used to the fact that he would spend a lot of time playing with his children and then going off to look at barnacles, and then playing with his children and then going off to the barnacles again. And they so much thought that that was just the normal way of things that one of his children once went to a friend's house and started looking around all the rooms. And he was going around the rooms, looking at all the different rooms, and he became increasingly distressed. And eventually his friend said, "What's the matter, Leonard?" And he said, but where does your father do his barnacles? And it was the first time he discovered that not all fathers spend a lot of time doing barnacles. And he is still my favourite quote of his from one of his letters when he was on the Beagle, when he talked about the fact, which I think is a very important thing for us to remember, is that we currently have an incredible amount. Our access to information is remarkable. And when Darwin went on that voyage of the Beagle, of course, the fascinating thing, really the only time that he travelled, he had this one incredible adventure, and then he spent pretty much the rest of his life trying to collate his ideas in a house in Kent. And he talked about going the Brazilian rainforest. He was in the Brazilian rainforest, and he said this thing, he said, one's eyes attempt to follow the flight of a gaudy butterfly, but are soon distracted by some strange tree or fruit. Today, my mind was a chaos of delight. And I think this is a thing where now it's very easy for the amount of information that is attainable to become mundane. And for someone like Darwin, going around, seeing a world, which we can now see on BBC4, and we can see on Sky, and we can see on all those different news channels, and we can go off to the Galapagos Islands, and we can go into the middle of a rainforest, and we can see the incredible hatching of monarch butterfly, and all of these things. But for him, he was going into a world that was almost alien. In fact, it was alien. He was seeing the strangest of orchids. He was seeing the most bizarre of butterflies and monkeys. And sometimes we have to kind of sharpen our senses and remind ourselves that even if we're just walking out and we're just going down towards one of the bays around here, we're just wandering around, or if you go to, of course, Lyme Regis, which isn't too far away, and you think of the incredible fossil beds there, and you think of the beautiful history there of us slowly piecing together the evolution of life and its possibilities. There's a wonderful, hopefully you've been to that brilliant independent dinosaur museum that's in Lyme Regis. Have any of you been to that? Yeah. It's a beautiful thing because it's a personal collection, so it doesn't have to follow any of the kind of rules of what a museum's meant to be like. It's just, here's a load of stuff I've found and this is what I've made of it. And it has that same excitement, I think, that you sometimes feel when you read about the great explorers and archaeologists and all of those who, when they were first discovering ideas of life and chipping it away, and that excitement of curiosity. So Darwin, I think, that's all I'm really going to say about Darwin, is just that the importance of us understanding, first of all, what a strange planet this is. If we don't, although Carl Sagan talked about it, Pale Blue Dot, if we don't focus on the fact that to have such a variety of life, to be able to hear so many different noises, to be seeing so many different colours, to know that every time that we look out of a train window, we see more life framed in that window than there is in the rest of the known universe beyond the planet Earth, is something utterly remarkable. And I think it's important on really a daily basis to at least have a few moments where you think, this is rare, this is odd, this is a peculiar thing. I was reading rather a lovely story about Frank Drake. Hopefully some of you are aware of Frank Drake. Frank Drake wrote the Drake equation, which is an equation which looks at what should be required by a planet for there to be the potential for life. And it's a very long equation. I won't recite it now, partly because I can't. And I was fascinated because he spent a lot of his life with organisations like SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, thinking about the possibility of communication. And it's a wonderful thing. If you've ever seen any of the documentaries about SETI or read anything by people like Seth Shostak, you will know that people, when they first arrive at SETI, imagine they will be the ones that are going to be the first people to hear alien communications. Even someone like Carl Sagan bounded in, and he sat down and he was ready. And there we are, there's the radio telescope, and after half an hour he was bored, because that's happened. Oh, I'm going to hear alien life. There's still none? That right? And but there's a beautiful story about Frank Drake, which is the fact that not only did he spend a lot of his life hoping to hear communications from beyond the planet Earth, the other thing that he did was he also worked on telephone helplines, the kind of equivalent really of the Samaritans. And he would sit, so while he both had the big picture, this huge picture of communicating with life beyond the planet Earth, he also knew how important it was to listen to those around us. and also to listen to those who were sometimes facing desperation, facing fears of what it was to be human. And I think that's part of the thing that we have to try and deal with as humanists, that it's important to look at the enormous picture and think about every time we look up at the stars and all the potential around all of those stars, but also not to lose sight of each other. So this is really where I'm going to start the talk. By the way, if you don't know about the way I do talks, is I have no plans beforehand and I just start and then eventually I stop. That's the way it works, right? And today I wanted to start because I wanted to talk about humanity, because this is really what I want to talk about today. Is I've done kind of forms of comedy, I suppose, for 30 years. And it's been very interesting in terms of over the years, as I've found the communication you can have with people. What I love about comedy is the fact that it strips away all artifice. You just start speaking and it's quite a kind of direct but somewhat one-sided conversation. And over the years, especially in the last 10 years, I've increasingly realised, certainly the audience that I play to, the audience that I generally play to wherever I am, one thing I would say about them is, very few people in an audience I play to have fond memories of being picked first for games, right? They're quite often, but a lot of us have 3 different library membership cards, right? So I've always been, and especially in the last 10 years, I've started, the communication, first of all, I think one of the difficulties of being human. One of the difficulties is the fact that we have evolved to have this strain, this self-awareness, this consciousness, to know that we exist, to know that there may well also be an end as far as we know. All of those things are peculiar things to deal with. And also we have another problem. We have a problem which is we have an outside self and we have an inner self. And sometimes in comedy you can address the inner self. You are a licensed fool, and sometimes people find it quite difficult. Like I remember once I was playing a gig in Nottingham, and a man came up to me, I was in the bar afterwards, and he went, "I am quite annoyed with you." And I said, "Oh, sorry, what have I done?" He went, "Well, I have spent my whole life believing that I am quite weird. But I've just sat in with your audience and watched your show, and I've realised we're all bloody weird, which means I'm quite normal, which is frankly disappointing, right?" But I liked having that opportunity. It's like there was on the same night there was another lovely moment where it went again about the inner and the outer self, where a man came up to me. I was on the stage before the gig started. It was quite a high stage. It was in an art house cinema, and this man came up. He went, "Hello, Robin," and I went, "Oh, hello. Oh, we've met before, haven't we? Was it Lakeside?" He went, "Yeah, it was Lakeside." I went, "Oh yeah, so how are you?" He went, "Well, I wasn't going to come tonight because it was my mother's funeral today, but then I thought I fancy a laugh, so no pressure." Now, I give both those examples about the fact that what I think is very, very important for all of us as humanists, as humans generally, is working out different ways of making sure that we are not always surrounded by a kind of carapace, that we're not always putting on a front. My friend Philippa Perry, who's written a rather wonderful book about being a parent and our relationship with our children, one of the first conversations I ever had with her, she said the trouble with being human is we judge everyone else from their exterior and we judge ourselves from the interior. And of course that is a huge disparity. You go to a party and you see people all having a drink and joking and you go, "Oh my God, everyone else is so confident. Look at Larry over there and Sue over there, and they're drinking Prosecco and they're making jokes, and I'm terrified, I'm terrified. How are they managing to do it right?" But you don't look terrified. No, most people don't walk into a party going, "I'm very, very scared," like that. You go, "Oh yeah, oh, do you hear the one about Brian? Yeah, right?" Everyone's doing that. So you don't know that in fact Larry and Sue are equally going, "I don't know if I've remembered the punchline. Oh my God, I haven't remembered that thing I just said there. That could be misconstrued, couldn't it? What if someone tweets that? There could be ramifications. Oh my God, what am I?" So this idea of judging the fact that in fact there's a friend of mine who, Charles Fernerhoff, who's based at Durham University, and he said an interesting thing about the nature of our brains as well, as we get so hung up sometimes with our thoughts. He said what you have to also remember is not all your thoughts are necessarily your thoughts. Some of them are also the noises of the machine. So that is a thing where first of all, as we try and address what we see as everyone else's exterior and our own interior, it can be very problematic because our fear of shame is so great that we will keep it all in until for some people it may well become a problem. For some people it may well become obsessive compulsive disorder. For some people it might become depressive illness. There are lots of different things that this strange thing of having evolved to the point of self-awareness, having evolved, because no other creature as far as we can see has that inner and outer self. If you have watched the behaviour of dogs, you don't see a dog going, I have to admit, I really do find that other dog very attractive, but I don't think I should do it here. Not in this public park, right? They don't have that same, sometimes we see, we project onto an animal the idea that they have a sense of shame, but generally their inner and outer is pretty similar, right? Whereas well, hopefully not. I mean, imagine, apart from that man over there, who I've seen in the park. Anyway, so one of the ones that I became interested when I did a show a while ago. In fact, it started off with a show about Darwin. There was a show that I was doing about Darwin, and that kind of led to me then looking more and more about evolved human traits. And evolved interior traits. And I ended up, for instance, talking about impulsive thoughts. This was one of the things that I got hung up on. I was fascinated in the fact that sometimes we have a thought and we are shocked by it. We kind of go, oh, God, I didn't think that was me at all. That's a very odd thing to think, isn't it? Why am I thinking that? Oh dear, I'm not the person I thought I was. And I used as an example of these kind of impulsive, intrusive thoughts, I used the example of when you are holding a baby. And sometimes when you're holding a baby, out of nowhere, it might be your baby, it might be someone else's baby, you suddenly go, well, that's a bit weird. I just had this, maybe you're standing by a cliff or an open window. I just imagined throwing the baby over the cliff. Oh my God, I must have a strong urge. By the way, I love that laugh. Oh good, he's brought in cliffs and babies, finally we've reached the humanist potential. And you get very worried, and you go, Jill, do you want to take the baby back? Just my arms are getting a little bit tired. I didn't just imagine throwing your baby over Durdle Door, right? So now I found that, and I used to have this point where I would ask the audience about having this thought, and of course it's a very interesting thing, depending on what theatre you're playing, depending on what environment you're in, of how people will react. So one day I said, who here has ever, when holding a baby, suddenly imagine just kind of like throwing the baby there, and you get to, and I said, I would be very specific as well. I said, when you have that thought, it's very important you go, oh my God, I just imagined throwing the baby over a cliff, not, oh. Right, so I knew that, because it's only an hour-long show, we don't have the time to deal with that latter position, right? So, and then on different nights, people would put up different, sometimes 50% of the audience, sometimes 3 people, very rarely people in the front row. People in the front row have learned something. People in the front row have learned to not, of course, that's, right. That happens quite a lot. In fact, the first time that ever happened to me, really, in a wonderful way, was when I was doing a show about evolved traits, and I ended up talking about the fact that I had been round to a friend's house, and she had recently had a baby, and I looked at the baby, and we kind of had a nice afternoon, and then just as I was about to leave, she's quite a kind of new age person, she went, oh, by the way, I've made a pudding out of my breast milk. I don't suppose you want to try it? And she was correct. And afterwards, when I got home, I said to my wife, isn't it odd that most of us have a kind of just an immediate, innate reaction to, if someone says, would you like to try a pudding I've made from my breast milk, you think, I don't know, right? And yet, a lot of people will have milk from cows. And if you compare the hygiene regime of your friend, right, if you had Molly compared to that, Molly's got a shower and a bath, and she's got 3 different types of soap and shampoo and body lotion, and a cow is just standing in its field in its own dung. Right, you gotta have some of that cow's milk. I never need Molly's milk, dirty Molly's milk, right? I thought, why is that? So on that particular night, in a room not dissimilar to this, right, I said, who here would eat a pudding made out of the breast milk of a woman they knew? And only one man put his hand up, but he put his hand up like this. Yes! He was tremendously keen, right? And then he looked round, he went, oh. And I said, you're thinking of a particular woman, aren't you? He went, yes, I am. She was meant to meet me here this evening, but she didn't turn up. I'm a bit disappointed. And then we kind of talked a bit, and then we moved on. About 10 minutes later, a door at the back opened, and she turned up. She'd been delayed. The buses hadn't been working well. And then she had to, she was quite breathless, go all the way down to the front of the gig with the whole audience that were just sitting there going, we know a thing. So it's... But it was an interesting moment of honesty as well, and I think that was kind of... But so anyway, so then, with the baby thing, I explained to the audience, like some nights when it was only a very few people, I would sometimes pick out someone. And I would say, now that man there, he put his hand up there, and I know what you're all thinking, you're probably thinking about that man, and I need to tell you something about that. And sometimes that person would sit there and think, oh my God, what have I admitted to? What does this really mean about you? I said, what you all need to know, especially any of you who have babies, what you need to know about that man is that he is the safest pair of hands to hold your baby. The rest of you, I have no idea how you've got this far, right? Because what is actually going on when we have that thought is it's not a thought of desire. When we're in moments of jeopardy, what happens is that you make a little public information film in your head. So as you're holding the baby, you go, you're holding a baby near a cliff. Remember, when holding a baby near a cliff, don't throw the baby over the cliff. Good night and sleep well, right? But it's delivered at such a speed by your mind that you go, bah! I think I want to do it, and of course that's not. And then if you can't express it, and I had so many people telling me other stories after that. Once I mentioned that on stage, I would have other people, yes, I've had I haven't had that one, and they tell me the thing about, when you're in someone's car and you're going down the motorway and you imagine grabbing the steering wheel, you have those kind of, there was one person who said, I was opposite my great uncle one night, we were at a party, and he was telling me about his experiences of the Korean War, and we'd had quite a few to drink, and it was a very, very sad story, and I was listening intently, and yet suddenly, out of nowhere, I thought, oh my God, what if just before he gets to the end of this story, I suddenly lean forward, kiss my elderly uncle directly on the lips and pop my tongue in? Well, I had to make my excuses and leave. So it's like... And another one is standing on train station platforms. Quite often you're stood on a train station platform and you think, now, I don't think I want to throw myself in front of the train, but I also don't trust my own legs. So I'm just going to move back and hold on to the bench for a while, right? And then sometimes you have the other one. Now I seem to be alone, apart from the man in front of me on this train station platform, and no one's here to see. Should I, maybe I will, right? But all of these things are part of this incredible point of evolution, the incredible point of consciousness that we still are so far away from understanding, which are creations of our mind, which we also have to fight sometimes, and which can be, like, in fact, there was the third time that I talked about the baby thing. A young man came up to me, probably in his early 20s, and he said, thank you. I said, oh, what was that? He said, the baby thing. He said, my eldest sister's recently had a baby, and the first time she asked me to hold the baby, I suddenly imagined just throwing the baby down. So I've kept making excuses to not hold the baby. And now I realise that I don't need to. That thought is not a thought of action, right? And that, to me, this is what we have to do all the time, is we have to find ways to communicate what is inside us. And to not be scared of the fact that this particular point of evolution has, it's the old line about, the keys to heaven also open the gates to hell, which is that many of the things that are tremendous and wonderful evolutionary advantages in terms of our ability to think can also, if used wrongly, badly, or if kept in, can at the same time be tremendously disabling to us as human beings as well. And I started to kind of look at this over, in particular in the last few years. I decided to, I wrote a book about, kind of partly about neuroscience and psychology and why we become who we become. And I've become fascinated in the last 10 years, because I do the show Infinite Monkey Cage. I'm very lucky in getting the chance to, sometimes scientists just come up to me on trains and go, hello, I've heard your radio show. Can we do an experiment with you? And I go, yes, you can, right? I love experiments. I love getting involved. I did Professor Sophie Scott, who did the Christmas lectures 2 years ago. She rang me up, she said, Robin, there's something you can help me with in one of the Christmas lectures. I was excited already, the Christmas lecture, so excited. And she went, yes. Is there any chance that you would have a magnetic pulse to the left-hand side of your brain that will affect your motor region and make it unable for you to actually be able to talk? Because I think if it works on you, it'll prove it can work on anyone, right? So, and I had this fun. I went there, and she said, do you want to see the health and safety? I went, nah. She said, are you sure? I will be using a magnetic pulse to stop being able to talk. I went, well, do you know what? If that's how I die, it's pretty cool, isn't it? It's so much fun. It was like, I never checked the health and safety, because I think I talked about this when I was down at BIC a few months ago with Brian Cox. I talked about the fact, one of my my favourite things is I love working with chemists. Lynn, you started off being a chemist. Chemists are my favourites, right? Chemists are, because of all of the different branches of science, there's so many chemists I meet. When you shake hands with them, their hands are always covered in calluses and blisters because they don't care about health and safety either, right? There's a friend of mine, Andrea Seller, who was on Infinite Monkey Cage a few months back, and he is what we call a hands-on, tongue-out chemist, right? He's very much, I can't remember, does that burn and is this poisonous? Let's find out. Ow! Yes. Right, he's that kind of... And a lot of the other chemists go, Andrea goes, I've done shows with him where some of the... I once put my finger in liquid nitrogen, which is a lot of fun, but it's fascinating as well when I put my finger in liquid, because Andrea had some, and he was talking about it, and I said, can you actually put your finger in liquid nitrogen? He said, you can if you want to, and I did. And so, and the trick is when you put your finger in liquid nitrogen, what initially happens is there's a wall of gas that builds around it, so it's kind of safe, your finger. The trick, though, is to remember to then take your finger back out again quite quickly. And that's, again, that fascinating bit in terms of your internal monologue, is the moment that your finger goes into liquid nitrogen, you think, oh no, what if intelligent me leaves for a while and idiot me's in charge? This is the worst time for idiot me to be in charge. Better take my finger out now. Nah. What? Yeah, intelligent you's gone. Keep it in for ages. Keep it in for about half an hour just for a joke or something. And then pull it out and get a hammer and smash it and all the bits of finger everywhere. Be a really funny thing to do. Trust you to be in charge, idiot, right? But Andrea one of my favourite things he did, we actually did an event about the Royal Institution Christmas lectures. When was that? It was about 5 years ago. I got a bunch of scientists to come together and do their favourite experiments that they'd seen in the Christmas lectures. And Andrea, he had an experiment where he was basically doing this demonstration which was to show the property of various different elements. And he was the first act on. And if you've been to the Royal Institution, you know it's a fantastic lecture they did with an incredible history to it. And so he went on, and then we had the next person, I think Alice Roberts was doing a demonstration as well there, and Helen Chersky and various others. And as I was going on in between each scientist, each time I went on I felt a little bit more wobbly. And a little bit more as if something was going on in my head. I felt discombobulated. And I started to think, well, it must be all this science. So much science is ultimately affecting my middle ear. This is just, I'm all over the shop. And then by the end of the evening, I was always having to hold on to the kind of little, I was like, hey everyone, have you all had a good time? And all the people in the front row went, yeah, we've had a good time. I said, you look a little bit discombobulated, a little bit dizzy too. They went, we do feel a little bit dizzy, but we're all right. And I went, oh. And then I looked down and I realised that in Andrea's first experiment, he'd used an enormous bowl of ether and he hadn't put the lid back on. So for 2.5 hours in an enclosed space, an audience would just be sitting there going, do you feel more Victorian? I do. And I think I like it, right? So I love experiments. Like the one I did with Sophie was, I sat there in a chair, there was the machine that would deliver the magnetic pulse. I was reciting Jabberwocky, so I'd just go, 'twas brillig and the slithy toves did guard and gimble in the way, all mimsy were the borogoves, and boom, raised out Gabe, right? And it was a fascinating thing to see the fragility of our brain, that one magnetic pulse delivered to a certain that part of the motor region would mean that and each time I had it done to me, there was a different experience. Each time I would lose my language in a slightly different way. So the first time I could see the words and it was like I couldn't grab them. I couldn't grab them. The second time I could feel as if the words were kind of in my throat. That kind of felt the words were there but they wouldn't come out. The third time it was like a total just blankness and then it started again. So these kind of experiments, again, seeing the fragility, when cells come together, when atoms come together, when all of these things come together and make a creature which has such complexity, and then the difficulties of that complexity. Now, within some of the neuroscience experiments as well, there was another one that I did, which is a very, very simple experiment. This happened again, I was on a late night train from Sutton Coldfield. A woman called Dr. Hayley Dew came up to me and went, hello, I work at Birmingham University Psychology Department, can we do some experiments on you? I said, yes you can. I said, here's my email. She said, do you want to check out who I am first? I went, no. She said, are you sure? I said, whatever happens, it will be an adventure. Let's just do it, right? So I went to her office. And her experiment was based around the rubber hand illusion, which many of you will know about. The rubber hand illusion is a very, very simple experiment which also reveals something very important about our minds, which is the way that we put together the picture of our world can often not necessarily be accurate. It can make shortcuts. Our mind likes to make shortcuts. This is why, in terms of the action of science, you have to be very, very careful in the way that you're using your senses to make sure that there is tremendous accuracy. So the rubber hand illusion, again, very, very simple. I go into our office, there is a desk there, I sit down, the desk is about that height, she says, pop your left arm under the desk, I do that, and then on top of the desk is a rubber hand. And she says, all you need to do is just stare at that rubber hand. So that's what I do, I just stare at the rubber hand. Now, this would affect about 30% of you here. Within 1 to 2 minutes, you will get quite a vivid physical sensation that the hand you can feel on your left-hand side is that rubber hand. Not your real hand that's connected to your body down there. You actually feel that is the position of your hand, that rubber hand. And it's remarkable. You go, this is just bizarre, this is bizarre. I actually feel like that is my hand. I feel like that's, and it's very, very odd, isn't it? I said, but I even know all the processes of the experiment. I said, yeah, how can I? She said, it doesn't make any difference because the bit of your brain it's affecting, it's not that bit where you go, I'm in charge. It's the other bit of your brain. It's dealing with other kind of, I was like, this is just so odd. And she said, yeah, this is basically what happens in this situation is your brain, your mind, to save time, to make shortcuts, to save energy, it just goes, well, that's a hand. It's probably yours, right? Then she ups the ante, then she gets out 2 paintbrushes, she starts stroking my real attached but hidden hand and my rubber hand at the same time in the same direction. Now at this point, this would affect 80% of you. 80% of you in 1 to 2 minutes would get a very vivid sensation that you could feel the paintbrush in that detached rubber hand. Nothing's going on down there, nothing whatsoever. It's all up there, and you go, I feel utterly lost, this is absolutely bizarre. And she's going, it's really weird, isn't it? It's really, really weird. This is a fascinating experience to have. And I am so concentrating on the fact that my world can be just so easily misguided, how that I don't notice her suddenly pop down the paintbrush, pick up a hammer, and then go, like that. I leap out of the chair and go, bloody hell! And she goes, ha ha! You really believe that was your hand, didn't you? I went, yes, I did! Why did you do that? And she went, I'm a psychologist. So it's, but these things, these little experiments that you can do all the time, they're a lot of fun. I mean, there's a simpler experiment as well. If you haven't got a rubber hand at home, you don't need a rubber hand, by the way. It works with almost any objects. That's the bizarre thing, right? A rubber glove is a simple thing to do. A normal glove, it sometimes even works with just literally a block of wood. It's very, very peculiar. But the other one that I learnt about was about sometimes called the Caputo effect. This is another simple way of seeing how your mind sometimes wanders off. All you need for this is a mirror, preferably a bathroom mirror with a light directly above it, one of those kind of mirrors that you can just kind of say, you turn on the light, you can turn off the main light, and you just stare directly into your own eyes. That's what you do, just stare directly into your own eyes. Now, again, for 80% of you, within about 1 to 2 minutes, you will start to get visual sensations. Not the visual sensation of just your head as it is, it will change. For some of you, your head will start to bubble and pulsate. For some of you, your head will suddenly appear to be ancient, like really, really, really ancient. For some of you, your head will begin to disappear. And what's happening is, you are giving your mind so little visual feedback that eventually it goes, nothing seems to be going on. We better make some shit up. So that's what it does. It makes, and then it makes you go, whoa, and then you go, oh, now I can see my head again. So these kind of things, very, very simple experiments, again, which mean the importance of questioning what we see, the importance of asking ourselves on so many different levels, why do we believe what we believe? Because that, as we see at the moment, as we see in the way that so many different kind of ideas and information is disseminated, and very often we find when we talk to people and we question their beliefs, they don't seem to have any, because that's the way things are, right? And of course the exciting journey is actually working out, this is what I think, but why do I think that? And that's where the excitement begins. And that's why also I think it's important as humanists is sometimes when we see conflicts, sometimes when we are angry with different groups of people and we think, why are we annoyed with that group of people? Why are we annoyed with... I mean, I will mention religion briefly, which I think is an interesting thing where sometimes, just because someone has religion, we can just kind of dismiss them. Some people, that is and sometimes we don't think deeply enough about the different beliefs people have, and we don't question them enough to put together a picture of what their worldview really is. Unfortunately, mass media has a tremendous and annoying habit of using the very worst examples of each kind of cultural group and organisation, because what the mass media is about, what mass news media is about, is not about offering you information, it's about creating entertainment. And the moment that we think we're actually being delivered information, I mean, the reason I started doing a show called 9 Lessons and Carols for Godless People was because I ended up on a TV panel show with a bunch of people, including Nick Ferrari and Vanessa Feltz, and I'd been told I was meant to be doing a debate about is Britain becoming more secular, and when I turned up, they went, oh, by the way, we've slightly changed the debate. I said, oh, what's it called now? They went, we're now debate's called Who's Taking the Christ Out of Christmas? So then I have to have this debate with people, and there's things like Vanessa Feltz at one point, she goes, do you know what, someone rang up my show and said that in their school nativity their child had to dress as a lobster. That is a scene from the film Love Actually, right? So I had to kind of deal with, and I knew this was what it was about. The show was not about delivering information. The show was about a feud. That's all they cared about. So that bit of and I think on Infinite Monkage, one thing that we try hard is to, as much as possible within the scientific world, give a reasonable broad view and also not give answers so much as, with luck, kind of springboards into interest into other areas. So we did a 100th episode. We're up to about 127 now. The 100th episode that we did, we had lots of different people on. And we had Brian Blessed on again, who I always like talking about Brian Blessed. There's nothing which will stop me now, and I won't use the mic for that bit. We had Dave Gorman on, we had Helen Chersky was on, Alice Roberts was on, we had Neil deGrasse Tyson on, and it was all people. I think one of the things that I love about scientific kind of exploration is the excitement and the curiosity and the desire. You know, everyone we had on that panel was filled with passion, and Brian Blessed, who we've had on twice before, he was absolutely magnificent as you. He's always magnificent, but what was interesting was, I think he was 83 when we had him on the 100th show. So there's that nice thing where Brian has still got all that vim and vigour, but at the same time, he sometimes has to go into a kind of, he doesn't go to sleep, but he goes into a kind of, like a mode, a kind of rest mode. Because no one can be Brian Blessed all the time, right? If any of you here try to be Brian Blessed for a full day, you've been in a coma by 11s, right? It's very, very hard. And Brian Blessed at 83, every now and again he'd kind of come in and be full of me, Brian Blessed! Oh, we're talking about space travel? Yes, we are. I bloody love it, right? So he was doing all that. And then he'd go into his little kind of, and then he'd suddenly be alive again, right? So Neil deGrasse Tyson was explaining the Large Hadron Collider, and he was taking quite a while to explain it. And just as he's about to get out, it's lovely because Brian he just sat there while Neil's going, another thing about is Brian and Neil's nearly there. He's nearly taken about 5 minutes, but he's just getting to the kind of now why we understand the idea of the Higgs field from the Large Hadron Collider, and he's just about to get to the pertinent piece of information, and out of nowhere, Brian Blessed just suddenly goes, I'm the best bloody actor in the world! Come on, Danny Dyer, I'll take you on, you little bastard! Sir Patrick Stewart! So, and I love him because he really does care. He really loves it. So, what was delightful was we also had a thing we called Clerical Corner. We had two of our favourite clerics on, right? We had Victor Stock, the former Dean of Guildford Cathedral, who was the first ever out Dean as well. And we also had the Reverend Richard Coles. And both of them very, I mean, Victor in particular I love, because Victor is he's exactly what you want from an Anglican priest, right? He's kind of, not only is he charming, he's tremendously well read, his wonderful ability to recite and discuss poetry, he's perpetually fascinated in scientific ideas, has very deep interest in them. He also has just that right amount of camp that means he can pull the rug from under many arguments, right? He's one of those priests that you know that he kind of went into the church because of his love of God, but also because he gets the chance to do a show every Sunday. You know, that kind of like, now I know I'm only meant to be in the pulpit for 10 minutes, but I'm doing the full 25 today, right? That's what he's like, right? He's a lot of fun. And so we get to, Neil again has been describing, I think it was where we currently are with the Big Bang Theory, the Big Bang, and he gets to the end of that, and Brian goes, that's fantastic, now let's go straight over to, for the first time, Clerical Corner. And Neil just looked at him and went, Clerical Corner? Do they have a physics corner in all of their churches? And then Victor just went, well, in Westminster Abbey, where of course we've got Charles Darwin, Isaac Newton and Stephen Hawking, one of the things that we do is, and he just saw Neil deGrasse Tyson going, I can crush angry American evangelicals, but kindly camp members of the General Synod, they are my kryptonite. And it was that great reminder again of where divides are required and where they are not required, because it's not, you know, and that is, I mean, that's one of the things that I do spend a certain amount of time with. There's various priests that I enjoy spending time with and kind of asking questions, and sometimes I find priests easier than some of the scientists I work with, because sometimes you tell a joke to a scientist and they go, no, but that wouldn't be right at all, because that's not how a toucan behaves in the wild. So, oh, I see, it's not a real toucan, it's behaving in a comedic joke way. Yes, right? Whereas priests love made-up shit. So there we are, that's, yeah, I know. I had my cake and I ate it. I had both there. But I do, I love all the conversation. I think that thing of having as broad a number of conversations with as many people as possible is really, really important, and away from social media and away, you know, when you actually can see all the verbal cues, all of those kind of things. So, oh God, I don't know how much time I've got. What time is it? Oh right, much less than I thought. Right, so, well now let's get to point one. So, this is the thing that I wanted to talk about when I was mentioning before about the kind of the nature of our brain and the problems with all of the different things that we are, and I think also that this is another battle that we have, and I kind of build up on this from what I just talked about there with the kind of argument with Neil deGrasse Tyson, which is, if we stop turning people into a multitude, you know, we are a multitude, we are so many different things, and this is one of the problems we have with things like social media and mass media is people are turned into a singular trait which turns them into a piece of drama, as opposed to the fact that we are all, as human beings, we're all hypocrites to some extent, we all have different kind of conflicts within ourselves, we are many, many different things. And I think that is an important thing to tackle, and an important thing to understand about yourself, important to avoid high horses, because you never know when they're going to be felled. You know, these are... So, sorry, it's just trying to think, because I've only got 15 minutes left, I'm trying to think what I actually want to tell you, because there's about 17 different things that I thought I was going to get to, and I should have started at a different point. I was going to start with a poem, but I didn't. So, because that is one of the... Because that was what we did with Brian. We did a show which was kind of about the passing of time, and I think, again, that's another thing for... I know amongst, you know, humanists, there are... You know, many of us, not all of us necessarily, but I know most people here probably agnostics to some extent, or may well be atheists. And for me, that's one of the things that I love. I was talking about this before with someone, which is one of the things that I love, which is why I don't like it when it becomes dogmatic. Anything becomes dogmatic. Is I love being an atheist because I can fucking make up. I can do what I want. It doesn't matter, it's fun. You know, that's the thing, is I don't have an overbearing ideology. Atheism to me came really because of the other things that I believed about the world. That wasn't my first belief, and then it was the other way round. And I think I'll tell you what, this is another thing again in terms of the battles, which are about us being a multitude, is I was meant to do the World Atheist Conference in Melbourne last year. And I was interested in doing that because the people who run it are very nice people, but I also was kind of worried because I knew that since the last World Atheist Conference, people had realised that there were a lot more conflicts, I think, than they imagined, or certainly quite a few people imagined, within the community, that just because you were an atheist didn't necessarily mean that it meant you had the same politics, the same cultural or social beliefs. And I think it had kind of come to a little bit of a head just over about a year and a half ago, again, lockdown to kind of people's Twitter feeds. And I remember being asked to do it, and I said, I'd love to do it. Salman Rushdie was going to be the keynote speaker. I thought that would be fascinating. I like going out to Australia and gigging there anyway. Then I got suspicious. The point where I knew it was going to get cancelled was they added another speaker, right? Loads of other speakers being added, and then they added someone called Clementine Ford. And Clementine Ford is, she's based in Australia, she's a feminist and an author, and also, every now and again, she says, kill all men. But it is in a fun, jokey way. I've checked the context. It's a very light take on killing all men, right? It's not a call to arms. It's kind of one of those, you know. And so the moment she was added, I started getting people on my social media going, I can't believe it! You're going to do a gig with Clementine Ford. She says kill all men. I said, look, I've checked the context, and it really seems a very frothy kill all men. It's not a manifesto, kill all men. I've looked in, but she still says kill all men, doesn't she? I said, yeah, but not all the time, and it's definitely not. And then eventually it just went on. And I said, look, to be honest, if she really does believe in killing all men, she's frankly slapdash in the manifesto, because she's married to a man and she's got a son, and she hasn't killed either of them. And they're easy pickings, because they're in her house asleep almost every single night. There's silly old Colin and Tony, here we go. And they said, you're beginning to get facetious, and they were a week out of date working out that. But it was an interesting thing. Sorry, again, I just found it kind of fun, again, because I do think in the context as she did that, it was a very kind of throwaway thing. But of course, unfortunately, what happens is once things are taken from their context, they become, you know, magnified in a huge way. Right, so I'm going to tell you three things, and then I'm going to do that poem. Maybe I'm not going to do that poem. We were talking before, actually, of different... Oh, sorry, right. I'm going to get this... I was going to tell you about chapter 1 of this, but I might have to go straight to chapter 12. No, these people will get Stockholm Syndrome, and I can't cause that here at Bournemouth campus. I'll tell you a story about Nicholas Parsons instead. Because this is one of the brain experiments that I was kind of involved with, was at UCL, University College London, and it was by a guy called Joseph Devlin. And he was very, very interested in finding out how performers' brains worked when they were improvising, right? It was fascinating knowing what happened. So he set up this experiment where basically we would turn up, individually go into an fMRI, and then play a version of just a minute inside the fMRI, right? And it's kind of a weird thing to do, because you are just on your own, and then someone goes, and your subject is bananas, right? And you're just on your own in fMRI, you know, Paul Mert's not there to suddenly buzz in with glee. And it was an interesting experiment. It wasn't a minute, it had to be 30 seconds, because they found that the control group of non-performers can't talk rubbish for a full minute about ginger nuts or Salisbury Cathedral or whatever. That's very much what kind of comedians and public speakers do, is they can just keep rambling on. Right, so we did this 30-second version. And then I got in contact with Joseph Devlin, and I said, I've seen that no papers have been published. He said, we couldn't publish any papers. I said, what happened? I said, because I got all those comics to it. He said, yeah, no, it was brilliant. We got like 30 comics in the end to go in the fMRI, but we couldn't use the results. I said, why not? He said, because 7 of the comics wouldn't stop wiggling about. He said, this is one of the important things in fMRI, right? I'll get them in the fMRI, and then I give them the subject, and then about 20 seconds ago, oh, hang on a minute, can I start again? This bit's not going very well. And I say, it doesn't matter about it going well, it just matters about improvising. It doesn't matter if it's jokes or not. No, but it's not going very well. So I've got a funnier idea about that question you asked me before. Can I do? No, you don't. Did Sarah Millican do better than me? Look, it doesn't matter about Sarah Millican doing better than you, right? It's not about doing better, it's just stop wiggling around, right? So he basically said, unfortunately, we found nothing out whatsoever about the hardware of comedians' brains, but a lot more about their narcissism. So, but I remember when I did that, it reminded me, I can see why comedians got very, very nervous, because having done Just a Minute, which is terrifying. The first time you do Just a Minute, it has a history, you know, it's 63 years old now, 53 years old rather. It is just this incredible part of Radio 4. It has had such great minds on it, and when you just sit there, like when I first got asked to do it, I was doing it at a festival, the Latitude Festival in Suffolk, and I'd had nightmares for 2 weeks beforehand, right? I had just been absolutely terrified. Every single night I would go to sleep, and just as I drift off to sleep, Nicholas Parsons' face would appear in my head and go, and your first subject is Toby Jugs, Toby Jugs. And I just see myself going, and everyone just buzzing in, hesitation, deviation, being rubbish, right? Just like 2 weeks of this terror. And then finally I get to where we're recording it inside this marquee, and I'm very, very nervous. Oh my God, it's my first time on Just a Minute. Clement Freud's on, Paul Merton's on, Phil Jupiter's on. Oh my God. I get slightly more relaxed because I see Nicholas Parsons walking out of a portaloo in a heavily wooded area. And it's just one of those things, it doesn't really fit Nicholas. Somehow a portaloo, Nicholas Parsons, immaculate in his blazer, just going, oh dear, right? So it's kind of, so I feel slightly more relaxed. I've seen that scene, and then I sit down and we start doing the game, and I think sit back, just watch it, watch the way that it's going. Don't get involved until you get your first subject, right? So everyone's out, he goes, right, Robin, it's your go now, and I'm like, and I can see Paul Merton going, I'm going to crush you. And because I don't know if you picked up that Paul Merton is quite competitive. Anyway, so anyway, your subject is the French Resistance, right? So I start, and because I've rehearsed in my brain this so many times, so many different times, all of that fear, it's as if I've done this rapid Radio 4 neural pruning, which means that I just rattle through, and my brain's going, no, that will be hesitation, no, that will be deviation, keep on going, right? I get 41 seconds in, right? I cannot believe it. And I'm like, I'm going to do it. And that's when my brain becomes overly confident. Somewhere around the 43 to 44 second mark, my brain went, oh, I've just realised, you can mention that British sitcom, can't you? And so I did, and that British sitcom was Allo, Allo. Repetition of Allo, correct challenge, Paul. So, but in fact, I remember doing it once with Sheila Hancock, who's one of the greatest players, and an incredible mind, an incredible player of Just a Minute. And she is the toughest player of just like really, the moment she gets the subject, that's it. Sit back, 1 minute, she's taking it. That's the lot. It's amazing, right? And then I didn't realise how tough she must have appeared on air until 3 weeks later. I was doing a gig near Keswick in the Lake District, and this person, I was just signing some books, and there was a person holding what appeared to be a cake box, right? And I think waiting for me, and eventually I went, I'm terribly sorry, are you waiting for me? They went, yes, I've got something for you. And this woman moved forward, and she opened the cake box, and in the cake box was a beautiful cake, like the bottom layer of a wedding cake. And in the middle of the cake was an iced version of Sheila Hancock's face, but made boss-eyed. And she just went, we felt Sheila Hancock was very cruel to you on Just a Minute, so we've made you this revenge cake. And that's probably the most Radio 4 thing I think that has ever happened in my life. I'll finish off by starting. This is... I'll do a quick poem, and then I wanted to talk. Well, I wanted to talk. This is again another thing about humanism, I think, which is it's something we were talking about last night when we were. I was staying in the Celebrity Hotel. Yes, I was in the Dolly Parton room. Hello, and just next to the Johnny Cash room. Oh, the fireworks. Anyway, so this was what I wanted to. We were talking a little bit about jokes. And it's something that I was fascinated. The book that I've written, by the way, I'll just explain what it was. I wrote it for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons was I think a lot of it comes from the realisation, doing gigs and talking to people after gigs, was how many people are when they leave their house, kind of holding themselves together for the whole day and going, I'm going to get through the day, I'm going to get through the day, and then they get back home and they kind of unravel. And I didn't realise until I wrote this book just how many people are kind of, the problem of sometimes surviving as a human. It's a very difficult thing. Everyone here knows all that. It's like when I mentioned the Samaritans briefly before as well. I'm fascinated in the idea of stories and the way that we tell stories and the way that stories can help us. And I was chatting to a friend of mine who used to work at the Samaritans, and she was telling me a situation which... about some of the people who ring the Samaritans. Sometimes when, she said, in particular elderly women ring Samaritans, and they get through and they go, hello, yes, I'm just ringing up. This is probably not the right line to ring at all, but I've got some men's clothes that I want to donate to a charity, and I don't really know if there's a charity near me. And the person on the line goes, that's fine, I'll check. Whereabouts are you? Oh, you're Watford, let me have a look. Watford High Street. Oh, there's an Oxfam and an Age UK there. So there, and the person, oh, thank you very much. And then you keep them on the line. And then eventually the person will ask, oh, by the way, can I just ask, I hope this isn't too nosy, why do you have so many men's clothes? And more often than not, the person will say, oh, my husband died last week. And what I find fascinating about that is, again, when I was talking before about the kind of the persona, the front, and then what lies behind, is that person couldn't ring up and just offer the story. It was, they had to, first of all, have a reason, a pragmatic reason. And then there was the point where they could actually give their real reason. And this is a roundabout way of talking about one of the things that I've found with a lot of the kind of public at the moment, the public spats that go on, the fury, the anger between so many different people, is, again, working out what we're angry about, working out why we're angry with people, working out why... I wrote a chapter in the book about jokes we make and why we make the jokes we make. And I think at the moment we have an interesting, I think a false free speech debate going on. We have a lot of people talking very loudly about how they're not allowed to say certain things, and they talk about not being allowed to say certain things while being paid £1 million to do it on a special on Netflix. And I think very often we're missing what's actually going on with people's reality. And so I wanted to look at that, and I interviewed various people, Ricky Gervais and Tim Minchin. Tim Minchin is someone who thinks very, very deeply, actually, about the jokes that he makes, and he worries about it a great deal. And I'm sure you've heard some of his incredibly, sometimes some of his most acerbic and important songs are songs that he is really worried about a lot. And then I spoke to a friend of mine, a person who, in fact, this book is actually dedicated to, a man called Barry Crimmins. And Barry Crimmins, unfortunately, he died last year. And he was a great activist as well as a comedian. And he was someone that always fought for the people who were oppressed. He always fought for the people who were having the worst deal in society. And that came from his own experience. I won't go into it now, but he had some terrible things that happened when he was very young. And he could never be called a snowflake, because also some of the people that he talked about and some of the kind of organisations that he talked about power. And he attacked power, and it led to him being banned from various things and not getting on TV programmes. So no one could say, oh, here is someone who's not prepared to take a fight. But I asked him, I said, Barry, when you're working out jokes, when you're thinking about what you're going to joke about, is there anything that you won't joke about? Because I think the jokes we say a lot about us. He said, and this was actually before he'd faced any illness or whatever. He said, I'll tell you one of the things I've never made jokes about. He said, I've never made jokes about cancer. And he said, and the reason is, I've never thought of a joke that's funny enough. I've never thought of a joke that is so funny that I would then not mind if it turned out it had upset someone in the audience. It had reminded someone of their own position or someone they'd lost. I thought I've never thought of one that I would feel content to afterwards be stating my position in a bar to someone who'd... So that's kind of one of my positions. And that's how I feel about a lot of things with language. I think that all the time about this kind of thing of going, right, well, and it doesn't mean that, because I think that's the important thing about free speech. The important thing about free speech, if you have free speech, it doesn't mean you have to say everything. It means you can choose to say, I want to say that, and I want to say that. And it then becomes more important if we think about why we're saying those things. And Barry told me this story, which he said, it really came home to me about 10 years ago. He said, I was doing a gig, and I was the last act on. I was in the Midwest, and there was a couple in the front row, and they loved it. They were laughing so loudly, and they wouldn't stop. It was like, and it was good though. He said, because it wasn't that one where other people were going, oh, that's annoying. Everyone was going, God, that couple are having the best time. We're going to have a better time too. We're having a great time. And he said, afterwards, I'm in the bar, and this couple come up to me, and they say, Mr. Crimmins, can we just say, oh, that was such a great thing. We loved, that was so much fun. He said, I'm really glad you enjoyed it. He said, we had a lovely night, because we don't come out very often, so it was really good. And he said, oh, you don't come out very often? They went, no, we can't. And he said, oh, can I ask you? And they said, yeah. In fact, it's why we had a bit of a difficult evening initially. They said, we have a child who's quite severely disabled. And those first 2 acts, they kept saying, retard this, retard that. And we found it hard, just the way it was being bandied about. And then you came on, and just very quickly we got a sense of who you were, and we thought, we're okay now. And it made us feel so happy. And Barry said to me, he said, that's the thing we have to remember, is that words are shrapnel. And you have to think about where you want to fire them. You have to think about why you're firing them. It doesn't mean you can't say things, but it means that the most important things you think about very, very deeply, and you don't just go, bah, it doesn't matter. He said, and that's always stayed with me. So I just wanted to mention that, because I know it's, it's something that we see in a lot of the kind of communities that we work in, and the arguments that we have. I'll end on a kind of a slightly lighter note, which is I was talking about inner monologues, and this was another thing I found. In fact, when I wrote this book, it was a book that I wrote and I thought would make me a lot better, because I have a lot of inner voices. I worry the whole time. I've worried about that throughout this whole gig. I worry about it. I worry the whole time. I'm worried about. I see people moving. I hear people kind of think, is that person bored? Is that person happy? Is that what they thought? They thought it was going to be more silly voices, enough jokes. What's going on? That's going on in my head all the same time as the other things. In fact, when I wrote the book, because one of the reasons I wrote the book was after the death of Robin Williams. When Robin Williams died, I saw loads of things about him in the news media, and I was really frustrated because everyone turned it into quite a banal story. Everyone turned it into this story which was, well, of course, yes, you can see why Robin Williams would take his own life, because he was a comedian, so comedians are bored, then something sad happens to them for a while, then they do jokes, then they take their own life. That's the way it works, right? And they turned it into a very mundane story, because, of course, the reason that he took his life, there may be many, as we know, many different reasons that happened. And instead it was, what frustrated me as well was I thought, it turns it into a special story as well. It turns it into the story of, well, comedians are not like other people. They're different, very different. And we see that all the time. It's like, when you see documentaries about Kenneth Williams is often turned into a singular thing. Kenneth Williams, of course, he made the whole world laugh, but he himself was very sad and miserable all the time. But he wasn't just sad and miserable all the time. Yeah, he did have problems with melancholy and problems with mental health, but also there was another side of him as well. He was many other things. My friend Peter, who used to be friends with Kenneth Williams, he said, I watch the documentaries and every time I go, nope, that's not right, but it makes it a more simple story. He said, there's often a bit where they go, Kenneth Williams was, of course, a fastidious man. He was a man who, in fact, would not allow anyone to use his toilet. And my friend Peter said, I used his toilet on loads of different occasions. He said, it's not true that he didn't allow anyone to use his toilet. The only people he didn't allow to use his toilet were people who were beginning to bore him. So, there we go. And of course, another thing, Kenneth, that I think Ian Forster would have said is, oh, by the way, Kenneth, do you mind if I just go and use your toilet? Oh, no, you can't use my no. And he'd send them out, and while they were out using the public toilets, he'd lock the door, and when they came back, he'd pretend to be asleep. So I wanted to write this thing which was kind of about what we all are, and what I think is interesting with comedy is that because of the way documentaries are made, it makes it look like we are separate, when in fact we are just the mouthy versions, right? Like the therapy thing, right? I wrote this book and I thought that I will be cured of all of my malaise, and actually what happened was I ended up going into therapy for the first time after writing this book, because I interviewed 5 different therapists, and at the end of each interview they went, I presume you're in therapy, Robin? And I went, no, and they went, oh. And so I went off to see I went to a Freudian initially, and I highly recommend it if any of you are thinking of therapy. Freudians are brilliant. But the reason that I love going to a Freudian is some days I turn up and I think, I don't think I've got anything today. Don't worry, they find something. I've done things like, I left my bag of books outside the door of the office, and she went, now why do you leave the bag outside? I don't know, mother. It's just like this whole thing. And one of my favourites was, she had this one where because I'm on tour a lot, I sent her an email, I said, look, sometimes Tuesday afternoons can be a little bit tricky. Is there any possibility that we might be occasionally able to change the meeting time, right? She doesn't reply to me. 2 days later, I go into her house, go into her office, right? And if you've ever had Freudian therapy, right, there's no small talk. You just walk in, hello, and you get on the couch, right? So I get on the couch, and I'm lying down, and she goes, now you sent me an email the other day, didn't you, about meeting times? I went, oh, yes, I did. It's just there's a couple of days when she went, oh, this is very interesting. Why are you sitting up for this bit? I went, oh, I thought we were pragmatically talking about meeting times. Yeah. but we're not, are we? She went, no. I went, sorry. Yeah, so it's like, I was late paying the bill in November. That meant a lot more than I'd imagined. It's just the... but I find, again, going back to this thing of expressing, like when I was saying about the voices in my head, right? There's, I could break them down, in fact. The voices in my head are, there's one voice, which is roughly what you're hearing now, with a few little changes every now and again. There's a second voice, which is just hammering away on an old Remington typewriter, just going, I've come up with an idea, 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 right? Then there's a third voice that goes, don't do that bloody idea. Oh, Dorset Humanists on a Saturday afternoon, they'll be furious, right? Then there's kind of a fourth voice that is just kind of going, I don't even know why you're doing this. I mean, this is every single night, 30 years, afternoons, nights, seeking the approbation of strangers. It's not good for you at all. You're the wrong person. I mean, Mother was right. You could have just done clerical work, the simpler hours, and less judgment. But, well, you've made a mistake, haven't you, really? And then the fifth voice is basically screaming. And So I was talking at one point about this kind of, about all of these different kind of voices. And when I'm at home, I actually do the voices. I talk to myself out loud. If I'm on my own, this is one of the reasons that I'm away doing gigs all the time, is at my wife's request. I took about 6 months off. A few years ago, I reached the point, I was on tour in Australia, I'd just been on tour in America, and I started to realise that I was going slightly mad, and I thought, uh-oh, this has now reached it. It's one of those things, some of you might have had it. You haven't gone insane yet, but you now know what shelf it's on. I don't know if you've ever had that. I'm not mad yet, but it's just over there if I lean over. And so I wrote a piece about the fact I was going to stop doing stand-up. It's just a blog post that I wrote, but it was a very quiet news day back in the UK, so it ended up being published in The Guardian, right, without my knowledge, which is how my wife found out about this. She's back in the UK, she rings me up, she goes, oh my God, you can't give up stand-up. I said, just have a little bit of a break, I don't feel that well. She went, don't be so stupid, you've got to keep doing stand-up, you've got to keep touring. I said, no, but she... And then she went, how are we going to live? And I thought she meant financially, but she didn't. And eventually what she was actually saying was, oh my God, he's going to be around the house the whole bloody time. When's he going to realise I love him? But from a distance, I have done very specific graphs. Look, when you were in Wellington, New Zealand, look at the magnitude of the love. When you were in Boston, the love has gone down somewhat. When you were in Aberdeen, oh, rapid trend. When you were in Croydon, oh God, he's going to be back in an hour. Treading things into the carpet and moving the magazines. So I had that moment where, you know, when sometimes you look at your partner and you know you love each other, but every now and again you can just see them thinking, but would I be happier as a melancholy widow? So it's kind of, and I ended up actually talking about that on stage, and my wife doesn't normally come to the gigs because they're not her cup of tea, and she said, I'm coming on Tuesday. I went, oh God. I said, I've got to admit something. She went, what? I said, I've got a couple of bits that are kind of about you. She went, what? I said, yeah, it's all right, I'm the idiot in the joke. She went, obviously. And I said, look, I'll run you through what it is, right? So I said, well, look, I've got this bit about when I'm away. She went, okay. And I said, you know, when I get back, she goes, and it goes on, right? And then eventually, and then I said, you know, and then you have this kind of look that, you know, you might be happier as a melancholy widow. And her face just lit up, and she went, oh, don't worry about talking about that. I've spoken to loads of my friends, and a lot of us wonder if we'd be much happier if you lot weren't around. So that's kind of like the... Anyway, the voice is right. So when I'm walking around the house, I will just talk to myself. Sometimes it's Brian Blessed, the neighbours don't enjoy that. Sometimes Brian Cox, sometimes Brian Sewell, all the Brians. And but I have a favourite voice, which is the actor Nicky Henson, right? I love Nicky Henson. He only died a couple of months ago. Nicky Henson's a wonderful actor, Witchfinder General, Psychomania. He's a member of the RSC. He's in the film Syriana. He's in Fawlty Towers. And he's an actor that I love because he's one of those 1970s actors who has one of those kind of 1970s voices. And he'd very often be in 1970s films with an open nylon shirt open to about the midriff, wearing a neckerchief and about to climb into a speedboat with Patrick Mower to enjoy a bottle of Malibu. Right, he's got that kind of voice, right? And so I would just walk around the house going, what am I going to drink today? I feel thirsty. Let's go and check in the cupboard. A cup of coffee? I don't think so. I'm Nicky Henson. A cup of tea? I'm going to surprise myself. I'm going to enjoy a sachet of hot chocolate, right? So that's kind of what I do. Now, About 3 years ago, I got a part in a Radio 4 play that was very last minute, right? It's one of those plays that's written over the week, no one really knows what's going on, you suddenly get a phone call, are you available on Friday afternoon to come to Twickenham and record a play? Okay, the script won't be there till you get to the theatre. Okay, I get down there, I get to the theatre, I'm the first person there, the producer goes, brilliant news here. You're here, you're about an hour early, so you've got time to look at the script and everything, and I'm looking through the script, and then I look at the front, I see the actors who are involved, and I look down and go, oh my God, there's just Harriet Walters in it. I love Harriet Walters, she's brilliant, right? And I look down, and then at the bottom it goes, and Nicky Henson. I'm like, oh my God. I said, Nicky Henson's in this? She went, yes, he is. Is that a problem? I said, not at all. I'm a big fan of Nicky Henson. She went, we're big fans of Nicky Henson too. He's very good. I said, he's very good. I said, look, this might sound a little bit weird, but some days I spend the whole day walking around my house, talking to myself as if I were Nicky Henson. She went, really? I said, yes. She went, you should tell him that. Actors like that kind of thing. Well, I did, and they don't. They don't like it one bit. They find it quite discombobulating. When we actually walked on stage, Nicky Henson moved the mic a little bit further away, so I wasn't quite in arm's reach. So, I'll stop now because I've gone over time, and I didn't tell you what I thought I was going to tell you, but that doesn't matter. We talked, and now it's stopped. And if anyone's got a question they want to ask, and that might actually get me onto track of what I thought I was going to talk about, the nature of humanism, which we didn't get to. But yeah, please ask questions if you'd like to ask anything whatsoever. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, question in the back. Oh yeah.
Steve Jones, Professor Steve Jones, like me, non-spawned, only from the other side of the fence. He's not got any kids either. He's a geneticist, obviously, as you know. Do you ever have head? I can't find it in my filing system in my head whether or not he's been on.
Oh, Monkey Cage? Yeah, we've had him on about, I think 3 times. We haven't had him on for a while. With Steve, do you know what? Quite often it's because he's away, actually. A lot of the scientists that we don't have on as regularly as we'd like are not because we don't ask them. It's because he also lives in France as well, where he goes snail collecting, as you know. Steve is amazing because Steve, again, his fascination, almost like a whale, is I think my favourite of his books. But all of them, Darwin's Garden book is, I forget, had about 3 different titles, that one, and Why the Descent of Man. But his love of snails has never diminished, right? He's fascinated, as you know, as he said, he's one of the top 5 snail experts in the world, and if you don't believe him, ask the other 4. And when he goes for a walk, you're just chatting to him, right? And you don't notice this, and at the end of the walk, his pockets are filled with snails, right? It's like a magician, right? You haven't noticed while you've been talking, he's actually going, snail, and he looks at, you know, the shells and all of those different things. His ability to convey different. I mean, that's, I think, part of the beautiful thing. I think last time I was here, I talked about Darwin's fantastic book, The Formation of Vegetable Moulds Through the Action of Worms with Observations on Their Habits, which was the last book that he ever wrote, having covered so many different topics and so many different ideas and so many different living creatures. And it's a really fascinating book because it's about something that we would consider to be possibly mundane, the earthworm. And Darwin, at that point, he must have published when he was about 71, he died when he was 72. Darwin started to think, how important are the worms? What are they doing? The aeration of the soil, the churning of the soil, how many different things that's important in terms of not merely growth, but even also in terms of preservation of various different things that lie within the soil. And he just wrote this fascinating book, which is about something which many other people may have just kind of, well, I don't think we want to deal with that. And it's filled with great experiments. There's one where he eventually, he plays a whistle to the worms to find out kind of about their auditory abilities. And after finding out they didn't react to a whistle, rather than stop there, he made his son play the bassoon to earthworms to see what happened there. So just a mind that is just, always, at the age of 71, still, he was at the end of his career in one way. He was getting sicker and sicker at that point as well, but he needed to keep understanding. He's working out. It's like that Ian Forster thing where someone actually once said, Ian Forster said, how do I know what I think until I've written it down, how I've actually explored it? And that's, I think, Darwin, as you know, the idea of On the Origin of Species being, one long argument. If you've ever read that, or Descent of Man, you will know it's part of that process. You can actually see him going, maybe it's this. And, that's what I love, again, in terms of being an anti-dogma thing, is Darwin at no point says, this is the truth, or this is, he says, it would be possible, I think, that this may be, and that kind of thing where you just see the journey of doubt, the reduction of doubt, but as the doubt is reduced, nevertheless, the doubt must remain somewhere in your mind. So to avoid that certainty. Yes, has anyone else got anything they'd like? Yes?
If you could choose to go into one of the sciences, which would it be and why?
That's a really hard question because I'm fascinated by particle physics. I'm fascinated by the structure of the universe and why this structure exists and the speed. But I don't think. What we can accept then, when I say what I'd go into, I'm also accepting that I would have no ability whatsoever because I'm kind of a very broadly shallow individual. The reason I think it works with Brian and me and that we're friends is that Brian is very good in terms of going, this is my area, and he really understands, whereas I kind of go, that looks fun, and that looks fun, and that looks fun, and that looks fun. But I find particle physics, there was a poem I wrote a while ago where when I was chatting with my son, I got worried. My niece, when she was 17 years old, it came as a shock to her to find out that there weren't kind of humans living on Mars or Saturn. Right? She hadn't realised that the universe, or at least our solar system, the only life we know is here. She had imagined that everywhere was populated. So when my son was about 3 or 4 years old, we were going for a walk, and I think I need to start instilling ideas in him. It doesn't matter that he won't necessarily understand them, but sometimes, what we were talking about yesterday, sometimes using the language just means that you're less scared of the language when it then comes up 10 years later. And so I started talking to him when we were on a walk. It was the autumn, and the barbed wire fences had lots of kind of like spiders' webs on them, and there were lots of different little traces of life left on the nettles, and it was one of those wonderful kind of autumn, the moon was very, very clear in the sky. And I started to explain to him about, and then I got to this point where I wanted to explain just a little bit about, this was later on, or the unlikelihood of us. And I'll see if I can remember it. I am disorder, you are entropy. We're a phase of the heat death of the universe, made of what might seem eternal, but it's probably finite when it's gathered up as us. I'm up quarks and down quarks. Charm quarks and strange quarks? Well, I'm definitely strange. Leptons, electrons, muons and gluons. Maybe tiny, tiny vibrating strings, ultimately. All gathered up together once in a primordial atom. A nothing, but a nothing with a lot of potential. And now we're hydrogen and nitrogen, phosphorus and calcium, sodium and lithium, and a little bit of uranium, all gathered up together by law and equation, but seemingly not outside instruction, though some might say an Elon Musk simulation. A particle menagerie, a bacterial multitude, waiting for my heat death, but currently preoccupied with being alive. And I kind of just wanted to, that thing of all of those different bits that we are. So I think I would like to, I was going to say if I had the time, but of course while I was doing the study I'd find out that time itself was non-existent, so that may well help. But I do find, and it's still, on a slightly different thing, the most recent monkey cage that we did, which I think goes out on Monday, is about quantum mechanics. And we've got Sean Carroll on that, and Jim O'Cleary, and I'll be very interested to know what people make of that, because it was a very interesting discussion, but I've since already had reactions from physicists who have kind of studied some of the ideas of quantum mechanics, who have huge battles within that area as well of what that actually means. So yeah, that would be certainly an area that I would be fascinated in going into. But anyone else? Yes, Linda.
Mr. Ince, you mentioned that you've written a few books. Do you by any chance have any available for sale?
Yes, they are available. They are, yes. I should have, that's what I meant to just bang on about all the things, because it was such it nearly drove, I was going to say it nearly drove me mad, not as mad as the 3 editors I went through. Turns out when you deliver a 400,000 word book, which is meant to be 120,000 words, some of them give up. So, yes, does anyone else want to ask? Yes?
I liked what you said about the multiplicity of the world, and evolution has produced this wonderful variety which we're sort of extinguishing rather a lot of at the moment. And I'm wondering if evolution might have done the same, a kind of similar process of types of human being. So that in Dorset Humanists, we have meetings where we try and put the world to rights, and we wonder about future of the planet, population, the economy, Brexit, you know, all the kind of problems. And then there's an urge to come up with a solution to say, well, so we should all do this. And I'm thinking, well, we're so different. We're never all going to do anything, are we? You know. So, what do you think about that?
Well, I do think, something we talking about over lunch, I think one of the problems, we were talking about the idea of democracy, and I think one of the biggest problems that we have, that we see in the US, we see in Australia, we see here, I think at the moment, is there is a problem with finding any sense of consensus when a very small number of people own the predominant means of disseminating information. So I think actually very often when you're one-to-one with people, when you're with a small group of people, all of whom appear to have different beliefs, once the information starts to come out and you talk, and this is the problem, is so much of things are set up. Like I used to get asked to do debates with religious people, and I would always say, no, I won't do a debate, but I'll have a conversation. I don't want everything to be a fight. So I would sit with people who would presume that I would have, and it would turn out, like a friend of mine, Nick Baines, who's the Bishop of Leeds, and we actually have almost entirely the same beliefs, except he has a kind of a sense of God in his head, but everything else. And so I think that bit of actually, the one-to-oneness is such an important thing, but we get quite, I mean, that's a bit like when I was mentioning the Frank Drake thing. The reason for that is, it doesn't have to be the big picture of the universe. Sometimes we get so caught up with going, I'm going to battle for this right, and you forget to battle for the person who lives next door, or the person who's alone, and so I think it might be in some ways a slower battle, but it's one which we have to do more and more, kind of one-to-one, and persuade people individually, and the only way for us truly to persuade is for us to also understand what, not merely why we believe what we believe, but also how other people get to. I mean, I used to talk about one of my favourite shows, and I watched it last night actually in my Dolly Parton room, is 24 Hours in A&E. I love 24 Hours in A&E. It's just, and one of the reasons that I love that show is one of my favourite. I used to talk about the fact that my favourite episodes are ones with very old couples. You get two people who are in their mid-90s, and the old man's fallen out of a cherry tree somewhere near Maidstone in Kent, and he's been airlifted to the hospital, and he's there, and he appears to be, people are very worried, seems quite unresponsive, and his wife is there, and Polly's, but she seems so, even though she might be about to lose the person that she's loved for over 70 years, she's still, like, she's just been so chipper. Thank you very much. Another lovely cup of tea. Thank you. He should fall out of trees more often. He never makes me tea, you know, just having a nice... And then looks at the nurse and goes, do you know what? I hope you find a nice young man, or woman, because I know the way things are nowadays, but, you know, I hope you have a nice... you know, and then, can I actually tell you how I met George? Because I met George, it was during the war, and we were at a dance, and we met, and we had a kiss, and I know we probably shouldn't have done, but it was the war, so we did. And then he went back to war, and then he came back in 1946, and he came straight to our street, and he asked me to marry him. And ever since then, every single morning, we tell each other we love each other. And every single night, just before we go to sleep, we say we love each other again. And you just think, this is the loveliest old couple in the world. Please don't show their voting record. But the truth behind that is that what you see in something like 24 Hours in A&E is very often people who may have very different cultural, political beliefs than we have. And yet when it actually comes to those kind of moments, those moments of jeopardy, we realise that the true values, the values of love and companionship and actually empathy and caring, I think they are accessible, and they are in most people. I'm not saying all people, but in most people, the real core commonly held values, which are often manipulated by different political kind of ideologies to turn people against each other, to make things tribal. In the end, I think, so that's why I think that bit of making sometimes our arguments, it's lovely to have these moments where we can all come together, because I think that's very important as well. Sometimes you need a lot of people together in a group just to go, I'm not alone, we're part of a gang, it's okay, because sometimes we can feel isolation when we appear to, but I think also that point of sometimes just being able to sit down with people who we feel we have nothing in common whatsoever and just talking in a humane way, I think can lead to, I mean, I think, you know, climate change has been tremendously manipulated by various different kind of large organisations with financial interests, and the body of evidence there is so great, and if we can continue to try and get that out, and again, very often with climate change, there's a great, National Geographic had an article about 4 or 5 years ago, which was about the kind of anti-science movement, and there's a climate change scientist, and she was saying, it's really interesting, my dad would not believe in climate, he said, he would say, well, I don't think it's going on, I don't think we've got accelerated climate change at all, it's absolutely, and he would keep quoting all these people, and she would keep going, but Dad, can't you see, look, I've this bit of research here, and this bit of research here, and it didn't go anywhere. And then one day she said, Dad, isn't it weird? You believe all of these men that you've never met, but you don't believe your own daughter. And that was the bit that went through to him. He suddenly went, wow, my daughter, I'm arguing with these people, I don't even know who they are. And she's someone who, how can I not trust my own daughter and her work? And she's offering me all this thing. And that, but it was the emotional attachment to that thing which then kind of made him start to change his mind. And I think that kind of tells us part of that story as well. I hope that's in some way an answer.
Yes, hello. You talked about words as shrapnel, which is a lovely and powerful phrase. Would you, if you could effectively, convincingly, cogently, and very, very funnily challenge a quite pernicious orthodoxy, a great world faith, would you be tempted to challenge it, to unleash that powerful funny and take away from millions of people that?
Yeah,
in that.
I think there's a problem with jokes, which is they're really useful in one way, but they're not ultimately very often subtle, or the intricacies that are often required to ultimately be persuasive. It's a bit like, I think sometimes jokes, as we found, if you just say to someone, oh, what, you believe in God, you're a bloody idiot, right? And you just off there, that doesn't work as an argument. So I think that to be persuasive, and I think it can work with jokes, but they have to be very intricate and they have to be very carefully thought out. I think lots of ideas, you know, in the end, jokes are more often about binding us than ultimately creating questions for the audience. A lot of the edgy comedians who talk about the fact they're saying things, you know, saying the unsayable. Stuart Lee has currently a quite remarkable routine about that. If you go and see his show Snowflake Tornado, but I think with everything that, if I've ever done anything contentious, like with the religious stuff that I used to do, I was very careful. I never actually made it about Christianity. I made it about a broad. So if it was certain things that were in certain religious texts, I made it about dogma. And I would make it about, so it wasn't like, oh, why are you picking, oh, I see you're picking on Christians, but you're not picking on Muslims. No, I'm doing a whole thing about creationism, where I've been very, very careful to make sure that says, that's everyone, creationism. I mean, I think that's part of the problem with sometimes some of the religious jokes, is that if you say, all Christians believe this, or all Muslims believe this, or all Jews believe that, whatever it might be, well, actually, that's not, very rarely in any religion, is everyone a fundamentalist. So I think that's why what we need to attack very often is fundamentalism. What we very often need to attack is not necessarily what might be the broad umbrella of people, but very specific issues within, whether it may be misogyny or homophobia or racism, whatever it might be. It's about fine, because it's about, to me, it's not religion that is the problem. It's about the actions of people and how they justify them. I was mentioning before on a car journey, which is, I mean, I think religion, of course, can be one of the quick ways of conveying that. But I also feel, sometimes in the atheist movement, I think there should have been a point where it was better if, rather than talking about the fact we were fighting against religion, we were fighting against dogma or bigotry. Because then also people can go, oh yeah, but what about communism? No, that can be included within dogma. And so that to me is the most important. So I think I'm very interested. I mean, most of the shows I do now have kind of gone in a different direction, actually, because I've tried to make shows that are joyous, because I've just noticed how depressed and scared people are. And I think it was the writer E.B. White who said that the purpose of a writer, you must always think about uplifting people. And I think that's a very important part of it as well, is that people can leave something and feel that they're less scared of the world. But I do think, yes, I would do that, but I think I would also, what I'd probably be talking about is I would take an individual action, which may well be predominantly held by one specific group, and I would talk about that action and its absurdity or its cruelty. Does that make, I hope that makes sense. Hello.
If Elon Musk does what he promises and starts ferrying thousands of people to Mars, and he offered you a seat, would you go?
I would give it to William Rees-Mogg. Jacob Rees-Mogg as well. I'd give them both the seat. The Jacob Rees-Mogg and William Rees-Mogg. I would be... do you know what? I still think... Well, I wouldn't want to go to Mars because I'm far more interested in this planet. I think Mars is... I love those images that we've seen of Mars. I think when we were getting those really crystal clear images, you go, that has to be made up, that has to be digital, and it really is. But I also think we do have a danger to believe that there's an escape plan. And the escape plan will never work, not for the civilization we have. Because when people talk about terraforming, you go, well, there is a planet that's terraformed, and this is it. And this is the one that... but I mean, I find it... I still think that the journey to Mars, the most important part of that is the achievement, in the same way that going to the moon, it's not about returning to the moon, it's about the fact that this could be done. And I think it is a great pity that we see that occurring over a mere 3 years and then it's over. But I also think it's right that what Rusty Schweikart said, who was Apollo 9, that's right, yeah, it was Apollo 9, and Rusty Schweikart believes that the most important thing that was done by the Apollo mission was not us landing on the moon, it was the Earthrise picture. That has greater ramifications. That moment where that was published, and it is still a startling and beautiful image, that moment where you go, wow, we've managed to leave our planet and look back on it. It's like, I mean, that's the story, The Sentinel by Arthur C. Clarke, which is, you know, what inspired 2001, is such a great story, because the story is... Do you know, I don't know if you know this, that the black pillars and all those things that you see used by Kubrick in such a wonderful way, and what a enigmatic film that is. But the basic idea in the simple short story that Arthur C. Clarke first did is the reason that an alien civilization is placed up there is should a creature have the desire to leave its own planet and have the interest and curiosity to explore beyond itself and go into then it means they are of interest to that alien creature. So I think, and in the same way with Mars, I think it is important and fascinating that we do see that journey occur. But I think in terms of the idea of some kind of, you know, liner that goes there with thousands of people on, I think that's a kind of, even if it wasn't a pipe dream, I'm not sure how pragmatic that ultimately is and what purpose that fills for civilization. Yeah, I have a bit of a sigh there as well. Is everyone all right? I agree with that. Is everyone all right? Has anyone got any...
It's a lovely sigh. It's been the best lecture I've ever had in this.
Oh, I hope it was all right for you. I was very, very worried for everyone today. I hope you've had a nice time. It's nice coming down here, and it's... oh yes, question there.
Oh, humanist meeting was much fun.
I hope it was fun. I hope it was fun. I think they can be. I think I mean, again, what I like about some of you will find out if you go into some of the meetings. Is it the 12th of June? I can't remember. There's the big Humanist UK conference, which I'm going to be speaking at as well. You know, the trouble with everything is once you get into the minutes of the meeting and all of that kind of stuff, then it will... I mean, I think that's part of my job sometimes as well, which is whether it's with science shows or philosophy shows or art shows or any of the different kind of shows that I've done, is that there is no great depth to them, with like they are an incitement to have some questions and curiosity. So we always need... I remember Dara O'Brien once saying to me, he said, you made science look too exciting. He said, there's going to be people who are going to come to you and say, when I was 19, I saw your show, and I thought, oh, brilliant, I'm going to be a scientist. Well, I've been in the same lab for 40 years, and it turns out we've got none of the results we hoped for. So thank you for wasting my life, right? So, but, you know, that I think that I think it's very important as well that we don't, when we sometimes get really heavily involved with the philosophy of it and things like that, is that we never detach it too much. I went to a philosophy conference. I was doing a philosophy conference about comedy at the University of Kent 3 months ago, and it was fascinating because when I wasn't doing my kind of stuff, I went to watch every single other lecture, and I found out, I never knew this, my life has been doing normative incongruities. That's what a joke is. It's a normative incongruity. And these people would do an hour-long lecture about the nature of what jokes are. And then I would say, but when a joke is performed in this, and they go, I don't really know how that... So it's like they've reached an equation of function of joke, which meant nothing whatsoever. Actually about what joking is, and I think that's part in the same way with all the different things, which is, Richard Feynman talked about when he went off to do, he was interested in philosophy, and so he thought, I'm going to go to some philosophy meetings, and he said, I just want to sit here and watch, I don't want to get involved. And then someone eventually went, Richard, perhaps you can help us, what is an object? And there was a 5-hour argument about actually what is an object. He went, I eventually realised that they've been having these meetings for 2 years and they still don't know what an object is, so I thought, I'm going to move on. And it's, so I think, that pragmatic excitement as well is quite important. Does anyone else like to ask anything? Brilliant. There, I think that's it then, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I will be, I've got some copies in my book. Thanks.